Good morning, everyone. It is great to see you here. I know several of you have family with you on this Mother's Day, and that is wonderful. And we are going to get back into our text in Nehemiah in just a second. Hey, Steve, would you hit those doors back there, please, brother? Yes, sir. Right there. Just smack them as hard as you can. Thanks, brother. So, I feel like the last time I was here. I was, and then I had to bail. So I appreciate everybody stepping in on short order, especially Scott, and just sharing a message. And I knew as soon as I started class, I was in trouble. And it just got worse as class went on. And the old me, the old stubborn, obstinate, I got to do this me, would have stayed and done it and been in bed for 2 weeks as a result. But the older, wiser me knows where my limits are and when I'm done. And I was done last week. So I appreciate everybody's stepping in and carrying on in my absence, including Wednesday's classes as well. Scott covering the 3 o'clock class and then my 7 o'clock class joining Scott's class in the auditorium. So just a brief review over those first 3 chapters of Nehemiah. We are at 445 BC. Nehemiah is a high-ranking government official in the kingdom of Persia. He's the cupbearer to the king, which he's not just the guy who tastes the wine and passes it to him. He's the manager of the wine cellar. He is an advisor, a counselor, a confidant, and someone who has a close relationship with the king. And that's incredible. This is a man of Jewish descent. And his ancestors had been wrested from their homeland generations before when Babylon was in control. And Nehemiah is so close to the king that the king's worried about him when he sees that his countenance has fallen. He knows he's not sick, he's on duty, but his heart is heavy, his spirit is troubled, and the king wants to know why. And Nehemiah just tells him. He prays about it before he makes his request, but Nehemiah has gotten word that their fellow Jews who have gone back to Judea and Jerusalem, who had rebuilt the temple, they're suffering. The walls of the city have never been rebuilt, and the city, as we're going to learn as we go further into Nehemiah, the city's not really inhabited because people don't want to build houses in there because there's no fortification, there's no protection. And so while it's wonderful that the temple has been restored and been rebuilt, things are a long way from where Nehemiah had hoped they would be. And so he takes that journey back for the rebuilding of the walls and the rallying of the people. So at the end of chapter 2, beginning in verse 11, we noticed this reconnaissance mission that he makes at night. It was probably a bright moonlit night if he was hoping to see anything, but he circumnavigates the entire city to inspect the walls. And as I mentioned last week, it's estimated that Jerusalem at that time probably covered about 90 acres. And so this was going to be about 2 miles of wall that was going to need to be reconstructed. And so he goes and assesses the situation before he even lets the people know why he's there. The purpose of the mission has not yet been shared with the people there. So, verse 17 of chapter 2, then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in Jerusalem. Jerusalem lies in ruins. Its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem. We will no longer be in disgrace. I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. They replied, let us start rebuilding. So they began this good work. And as soon as the good work begins, the opposition and the pushback begins from Sanballat, the Horonite, and Tobiah the Ammonite, Geshem the Arab, and they cast aspersion. They send these volleys of mockery and ridicule at them, asking them, what are you doing? Are you rebelling against the king? And that's going to be an ongoing false narrative in this story. This is going to be ongoing fake news in the latter chapters of Nehemiah, that somehow their intent and purpose in rebuilding this walls is so that they can rebel against their Persian overlords. That's not it at all. They just need to be protected from these nations surrounding them. So we summarized chapter 3 by, we didn't painstakingly read it because it goes into great detail about who rebuilt what section of the wall from what gate to what gate. And there were 10 gates that were reconstructed, and these were elaborate gates. And when you think about the wall, don't think about a brick wall outside your addition, at the entrance to your addition. These walls were probably 9 feet thick. They could have been thicker than that. In the ancient Near East, they would often build casement walls, which were double walls with rooms, on the lower floors. You could store grain, you could store armaments, all kinds of things. And so there's an outer wall, and then there's space where things can be stored. There is an inner wall. So this isn't some small project that is being undertaken here. One thing that I mentioned in passing last week that I'll hit again is that people were involved in this work that weren't trained for this work. This calls for all hands on deck. And so as you read through chapter 3 about these various sections of wall being repaired and these gates being rebuilt, there are priests involved, there are Levites involved, there are goldsmiths, and there are merchants. They're not carpenters, they're not stonemasons, and yet all hands are needed, and so they put their hands to the work. So that catches us up to where we ended last week, and we'll start in Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 1. When Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he goes from perturbed to angry, and he was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews, and in the presence of his associates in the army of Samaria, he said, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are?" And Tobiah the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, "What are they building? Even a fox climbing up on it would break down their wall of stones." Trying to think of the biggest insult he can make. If he tried a little harder, he could probably come up with a worse one than that. But still, a fox hopping up on this wall would bring it down. Anything they can do to undermine their confidence, to break their spirit, they're going to say. And anytime Sanballat shows up, they're like frickin' frack. Tobiah is going to be right there beside him, echoing the same type message. And at this point, there is a cry from Nehemiah that sounds a lot like the imprecatory psalms in the book of Psalms. Those psalms in which God is beseeched to bring judgment and justice and punishment upon Israel's enemies. So this is how they respond to that opposition and criticism. Verse 4, "Hear us, our God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders." And they're going to have to stiffen their resolve to overcome this opposition. So notice they don't just build one section in its completeness to its full height. They build the entire wall to half its height, all the way around the city. Verse 6, "So we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart." But when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the people of Ashdod were Philistines, so they're garnering as many other opponents to stand against this work as they can. When they heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's walls had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. And they all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against it. But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat. When you look at the tactics of Sanballat and Tobiah, they are leaders of their groups of people in that area, and they operate very much like politicians operate. They feed upon misinformation, they feed upon fear, and try to instill fear and uncertainty in the hearts of people. And that's political tactics of all stripes and all parties. And just listen carefully. I don't know what your political affiliations are. It doesn't make any difference to this point. But just listen how much emphasis is put on fear. How much emphasis is put on ridicule and insult to whoever else, other than them. And those are the tactics that are used here. Meanwhile, the people in Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out, and there is so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall. Also, our enemies said, before they know it or see it, we will be right there among them and will kill them and put an end to the work. Just constant negativity that they're facing. Then the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times over, wherever you turn, they will attack us. And so the hearts of the people themselves are beginning to melt a little bit, and they're starting to doubt whether or not this can be accomplished. So Nehemiah has to fortify not only their spirits, but fortify the workers themselves so that they don't feel like they're constantly under threat and have to be looking over their shoulder. Therefore, I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords, their spears, and their bows. It's not just shovels and trowels and hammers and saws that are being used. We're going to need to take swords and spears and bows with us. After I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. It's almost like John writes in 1 John chapter 4, verse 4, greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world. Don't fear them. Remember who our God is. Don't fear their God. Put your faith, your trust in the God of our fathers. When our enemies heard that we were aware of their plot and that God had frustrated it, we all returned to the wall, each to our own work. From that day on, half of my men did the work while the other half were equipped with spears, shields, bows, and armor. We're going to see several different scenarios here of how the work was carried out. And at this point, you've got half working, half standing guard with their armaments in hand. The officers posted themselves behind all the people of Judah who were building the wall. Those who carried materials did their work with one hand and held a weapon in the other. Obviously, these materials they were carrying had to be small enough to be carried in one hand. There are certain jobs that can't be done with one hand. But carrying materials is one that could be accomplished in that way. Notice the difference then in verse 18 with the builders. Each of the builders wore his sword at his side as he worked. So the guys who are carrying materials, carrying in one hand, got a weapon in the other. Those who need two hands for the job they're doing, they've at least got their sword on their side. But the man who sounded the trumpet stayed with me. Then I said to the nobles, the officials, the rest of the people, the work is extensive and spread out. We are widely separated from each other along the wall. Wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, join us there. Our God will fight for us. Remember, we're talking about an expanse of 2 miles, maybe, around the city. And so you've got groups of workers separated by some distance, and trumpeters are going to be stationed all around. As soon as you hear that signal, you make a move toward that sound. I don't know, some of you probably have worked in situations where literally the whistle blew at the end of the day when the shift was over. Just hearing a sound can communicate a lot. That's a great sound to hear at the end of a long day when that whistle blows. You hear a tornado siren, it's a different message that you get. But the sound gets your attention and lets you know that action needs to be taken. Late yesterday afternoon, I finally made it to the driving range for the first time this year and was just finishing up the first bucket of balls when they sounded the siren outside the clubhouse because there was lightning in the area. And, you know, for those that didn't get the message from the sounding of the siren, the voice started coming over the loudspeaker telling everybody to clear the course and clear the driving range. Sounds like that have meanings. So you guys work, if you hear the sound, go toward the sound of the trumpet. So we continued the work, verse 21, we continued the work with half the men holding spears from first light of dawn till the stars came out. At that time I said to the people, have every man and his helper stay inside Jerusalem at night so they can serve as guards by night and as workers by day. You start wondering when these people sleep, you know. They work all day, they stand guard at night. Obviously, this is going on in shifts. Neither I nor my brothers nor my men nor the guards with me took off our clothes. Each had his weapon, even when he went for water. How long is this going to go on? 52 days. We're going to learn that in a little bit in the text. But this is how they lived for nearly 2 months. So getting into chapter 5, it's not just physical things that need to be rebuilt. There's a ministry to people that needs to be taking place. And what's transpired in the preceding decades is not just that the walls haven't been rebuilt, it's that walls around people's relationships have been destroyed. And certain people are taking advantage of other people. The wealthy were taking advantage of the poor, and it's not just the surrounding Gentiles who were taking advantage of them. It was their Jewish brethren who were taking advantage of them, who were loaning money with steep interest, which was contrary to the law that they had been given at Sinai. Now the men and their wives raised a great outcry, this is chapter 5, verse 1, against their fellow Jews. Some were saying, we and our sons and daughters are numerous. In order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain. Others were saying, we are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during the famine. Times were hard, and they were being made worse by the punitive practices of some of their fellow Jews. Verse 4, still others were saying, we've had to borrow money to pay the king's tax on our fields and vineyards. If you remember when Ezra first brought the people back, they were supposed to be exempt from taxes to Persia. Apparently that has changed over the years. We've had to borrow money to pay the king's tax on our fields and vineyards. Although we are of the same flesh and blood as our fellow Jews, and though our children are as good as theirs, yet we have to subject our sons and daughters to slavery. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but we are powerless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others. They've become indentured servants because of their debts, and they're turning to Nehemiah not just as a governor, not just as one who is going to rebuild the walls of the city, but he's going to restore justice. He's going to set right things that have been seriously wrong. When I heard their outcry in these charges, I was very angry. I pondered them in my mind and then accused the nobles and officials. I told them, you're charging your own people interest. So I called together a large meeting to deal with them and said, as far as possible, we have bought back our fellow Jews who were sold to the Gentiles. Now you are selling your own people, only for them to be sold back to us. They kept quiet because they could find nothing to say. The charges were clear and the charges were true. So I continued. What you are doing is not right. Shouldn't you walk in the fear of our God to avoid the reproach of our Gentile enemies? I and my brothers and my men are also lending the people money and grain, but let us stop charging interest. Give back to them immediately their fields, their vineyards, their olive groves, their houses, and also the interest you are charging them, 1% of the money, grain, new wine, and olive oil. And the people respond positively. We will give it back, they said, and we will not demand anything more from them. We will do as you say. Then I summoned the priests and made the nobles and officials take an oath to do what they had promised. I also shook out the folds of my robe and said, in this way may God shake out of their house and possessions anyone who does not keep this promise. So may such a person be shaken out and emptied. Illustrations, visuals are always helpful. And it's almost like Jesus telling his disciples, if you're not received in a village or in a town, just shake off the dust from your feet and move on. Go to a place you'll be welcome. Go to a place you'll be received. And in shaking out his garments like this, he's saying, if you don't comply, this is what God's going to do to you. And everybody's on board. The whole assembly said, amen, and praised the Lord. And the people did as they promised. Moreover, from the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah until his 32nd year, so this would have been from 445 BC to 433 BC, neither I nor my brothers ate the food allotted to the governor. Now we're going to find that because of the number of people that ate at Nehemiah's table on a daily basis, there's quite a banquet that's prepared. It takes a lot of food to feed that many people. But he's not abusing his position. He's not taking advantage even of resources that were there for him to use because he's wanting to lead by example. He's standing against those who had unethically taken advantage of people around them, and he wants the people, for him to have any credibility in this at all, he's got to have a high ethical standard himself, and including his standard of living and how austere his existence is compared to the luxury he could have had. So for that entire 12-year period, he restricted himself from some of the resources that he could have utilized. Neither I nor my brothers ate the food allotted to the governor. But the earlier governors, those preceding me, placed a heavy burden on the people and took 40 shekels of silver from them in addition to food and wine. Their assistants also lorded it over the people. But out of reverence for God, I did not act like that. He has authority, but he's not an overlord. And in 1 Peter 5, we find that instruction given to shepherds and overseers. They are to lead by example, not as overlords, not lording it over the flock of God. Verse 16, instead, I devoted myself to the work on this wall. All my men were assembled there for the work. We did not acquire any land. Furthermore, 150 Jews and officials ate at my table on a daily basis. That's where the big banquet comes from, as well as those who came to us from the surrounding nations. Each day, 1 ox, 6 choice sheep, and some poultry were prepared for me. I'm not certain how often poultry is mentioned in the Old Testament. That's why it jumped out at me. Some of you do a quick search on your apps, and you can tell me how often poultry is mentioned in the Old Testament, but it just sort of leapt out of the text at me this past week. 6 choice sheep and some poultry were prepared for me, and every 10 days an abundant supply of wine of all kinds. In spite of all this, I never demanded the food allotted to the governor. because the demands were heavy on the people. This is a leader who's willing to suffer as his people are suffering. And that's just a beautiful quality of leadership. He is not above the people, he is among the people. He is one of them. Verse 19, he wants to make sure that his actions, his attempts at integrity are noticed and acknowledged by the Lord, and they receive his favor and his blessings. Remember me with favor, my God, for all I have done for these people. I don't think Nehemiah is being arrogant. I don't think he's being prideful. He just knows that a lot is being demanded of him, and he is making personal sacrifices in leading the people, and he just wants that to be acknowledged by the God for whom he is doing all of these things. When word came, this is chapter 6, verse 1, when word came to Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies that I had rebuilt the wall and not a gap was left in it, though up to that time I had not set the doors in the gates. Again, some of these gates, don't think of your backyard gate into a park or something like that. Not only were these walls like casement walls with double walls and space in between, the gates were elaborate. There could be numerous sets of doors within these deep gates and even turns that had to be made to get through. It just makes it more easily defensible. Because if an enemy breaks through the outer door, they just can't rush in. They're going to have to make a turn, and waiting for them there will be defenders. So the last thing that's going to be done is setting the doors within these gates. Verse 2, Sanballat and Geshem sent this message to me, "Come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono." Every tactic that they have used so far, misinformation and mockery and ridicule, has failed to achieve its goal. And so now they're just wanting to get him entrapped in endless conversation and negotiation, maybe even compromise. And Nehemiah is not going to budge one bit. Let's meet down on the plain of Ono. But they were scheming to harm me. So I sent messengers to them with this reply: I'm carrying on a great project and cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you? 4 times they sent me the same message, and each time I gave them the same answer. Then the 5th time, Sanballat sent his aide to me with the same message, and in his hand was an unsealed letter in which was written, and the reason it's unsealed is because he wants the messenger to read it, and he wants the messenger to tell everybody what's in the letter. It's reported among the nations, and Geshem says it's true. This is the modern day of equivalent of saying, I saw it on the internet. Okay? I read this online, and it's been verified in other online sources. It is reported among the nations, and Geshem says it's true, that you and the Jews are plotting to revolt, and therefore you are building the wall. We've talked about this in the Wednesday night and Wednesday afternoon classes on how to read the Bible for all it's worth. It's this truth by assertion principle. Just by saying it, somebody's going to believe it's true. And that's their play here. That's what they're up to. If we just say this, and say this with enough conviction and with enough volume, maybe it'll gain some traction. Maybe some people will begin to think it's true. You're going to revolt, and that's why you're building the wall. Moreover, according to these reports, you're about to become their king. So, this is this grand conspiracy theory that's at work here. There's going to be a revolt, and Nehemiah, you've got no intention, You told Artaxerxes you needed a leave of absence so you could go rebuild the walls, and you gave him a time frame and when you would be back on duty. You've got no intention of going back. You want to be king of the Jews, reigning in Jerusalem. and have even appointed prophets to make this proclamation about you in Jerusalem. There is a king in Judah. Now this report will get back to the king, so come, let us meet together. We could send this message back to Persia, to Artaxerxes, but if you'll come down and meet with us, maybe we could work something out. And you can sense and feel the desperation growing in Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem and these other opponents, because they realize how close to finished this fortification is. So I sent him this reply: nothing like what you were saying is happening. You're just making it up out of your own head. You're just grasping this out of thin air. You're just making it up. There's nothing true about it. And, 1 John 4 urges us to discern the spirits, test the spirits to see whether they are from God. We got a lot of competing messages in our world, and a lot of them are mutually exclusive, and we have a great responsibility to be discerning in separating truth from fiction. And Nehemiah says, you just totally made this up. They were all trying to frighten us, thinking their hands will get too weak for the work and it will not be completed. But I prayed, now strengthen my hands. Nehemiah knew that he needed divine assistance and strength and aid, and he prays for the Lord to strengthen his hands to complete the work. One day I went to the house of Shemaiah, the son of Delaiah, the son of Mehetabel, who was shut in at his house. He said, let us meet in the house of God inside the temple, and let us close the doors, because men are coming to kill you. By night they are coming to kill you. This was apparently someone that should have been able to be trusted. And he's trying to convince Nehemiah that he needs to barricade himself in the temple because there's going to be an attempt made on his life. But I said, should a man like me run away? Or should someone like me go into the temple to save his life? I will not go. And again, this is the example of a strong, courageous leader. He's not going to run when he hears that his life may be under threat. I realized that God had not sent him, but he had prophesied against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him, prophet for hire. He had been hired to intimidate me so that I would commit a sin by doing this, and they would give me a bad name to discredit me. So there's all kinds of plotting and subterfuge going on, bribery going on, to try to undermine this work. And then, like we saw back in chapter 4, verses 4 and 5, reminiscent of imprecatory psalms, those kinds of words again here at verse 14. Lord, remember Tobiah and Sanballat, my God, because of what they have done. Remember also the prophet Noadiah, and how this is another prophetess, the prophet Noadiah, and how she and the rest of the prophets have been trying to intimidate me. So the wall was completed on the 25th of Elul in 52 days. That was an intense 52 days. A lot of sweat, a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of emotional pressure and stress and strain as you're dealing with this opposition. And even within your own camp, people are spreading misinformation and disinformation. Prophets are being hired to speak things against you. Verse 16, when all our enemies heard about this, all the surrounding nations were afraid and lost their self-confidence because they realized that this work had been done with the help of our God. Also in those days, the nobles of Judah were sending many letters to Tobiah, and replies from Tobiah kept coming to them. This thing just won't die. He will not let it go. For many in Judea were under an oath to him, and then you see all the family connections, the intermarriages that have taken place with influential families and who's in cahoots with who. He was the son-in-law to Shechaniah, son of Era, and his son, Jehohanan, had married the daughter of Meshullam, the son of Berechiah. Moreover, they kept reporting to me his good deeds and then telling him what I said. Read that verse again. Moreover, they kept reporting to me Tobiah's good deeds and then telling him what I said. It's just like there's no peace. Even though the walls have been rebuilt, there's still people, operatives for Tobiah, trying to convince Nehemiah that he's a man who can be trusted. He's a man you could enter into a relationship with or make some kind of compromise with. And every time Nehemiah responded negatively, they were going back and reporting these things to Tobiah. And Tobiah sent letters to intimidate me. The last words there of verse 19 of chapter 6. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up there today. Our goal next week is to cover chapters 7, 8, and 9. And then Jerry is going to lead the class 2 weeks from today on chapters 10, 11, 12, and 13. And amazingly then, the quarter's going to be over. And I know it always seems daunting when you start a study, like Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. There's just so much material. Can you ever get through it? And now we're just, basically a couple of weeks from finishing up. So we'll start next week with the resettling of the city and Ezra's re-entering into the story. Ezra hasn't disappeared. Remember, Ezra went back about 10 years before Nehemiah came back. He's still on the scene while all of this is going on. And so we'll pick up there next week. Our worship assembly will get started at 10 o'clock. Thanks so much for being here today.